Hello and welcome to Safety Tavern's video on silica and particle awareness. The way this video is going to work is first we're going to look at some very broad, some very wide sweeping regulations that kind of cover everybody. And then we're going to narrow down and look at some very specific regulations. First, we need to get a myth out of the way. And the myth is we just didn't know that silica and these airborne particles were so hazardous to our health. That's just not true. This is a 1938 video released by the Department of Labor where we knew that the silica inside of concrete, if it's turned airborne, it can hurt you. Look right here. They're literally laying out in this video that anyone can go onto YouTube and see. They're laying out exactly how to sweep. Don't just sweep. You're going to put it up into the air and then you're going to breathe it in. We have known for a long time. Here's another video from the 1940s. We have known for a long time that breathing in concrete dust will hurt you and will kill you. There are a lot of things in OSHA that people can say, well, we just didn't know. This is not one of them. If you are of the opinion that we just didn't know, that's not true. What it is we didn't care to look. So now let's all take a real hard look and see what's really at risk here. This plus this equals this, and then this. Hard math, I know. Hang on, here we go. This plus this equals this, and then this. No? Still didn't get it? Okay. This plus this equals this, and then this. Overall, we could even break the equation down even further. This equals this. Silica and airborne particles is not something you want to play with. It is the kind of thing that affects you for the rest of your life. To kind of wrap this whole thing up in a nutshell, if this is a possibility, then you need to do something like this. If GCs, you're allowing this kind of stuff to happen on your job sites, you can't just let all the dust land wherever it wants to go. You've got to do something like this. You have to do some form of dust abatement. As a contractor, as an employee, as a supervisor, if you're kicking out things like this, you need to implement some of these measures. And if you don't like the color blue or yellow or whatever, don't worry. There's HEPA vacuums in all colors, in shapes and sizes, just to make your life even better. Now, keep in mind that these filters will need to be cleaned on regular intervals. So it's not like a wet vac that you just empty and let it go. You need to actually change the bags or change the filters as often as the manufacturer recommendations tell you to. Instead of sweeping, you may need to implement something like this. Also, in some of the regulations, we're going to talk about clean rooms. This is a similar form of that. But we're not just talking about silica. Take a look at this picture. Do y'all think you should be breathing in this? What about all this crap that this dude's kicking up into the air? How much bird poop, rat poop, dog pee is this employee kicking up into the air? Does anybody here think that breathing animal feces and urine is a good idea? That's assuming that there's no chemicals that have been poured out onto the street down there. Whenever you're doing this kind of work, you're taking everything that's on the floor and you're vaporizing it. You're putting it into the air. Take a look at this situation. Look at the color of the vapors here. Do you think this is just water? Absolutely not. Who knows how much crap this person is kicking up into the air? It's not just water that you're breathing in. Look at this situation. Now, this guy's got a mask, but is it even rated for all this debris? Is it actually protecting him? This is a picture of a fireman after he went in and dealt with a fire and he got exposed to smoke inhalation. So that's another thing we need to look at is any kind of hot work that we may be doing in the area, but not just the actual material, but also what is the coating? What is the goop that's on there that we're cutting as well? All of these are airborne particles. They're airborne because we have made them airborne. And the trick is, how are we going to keep your blood vessels, your lung vessels, your everything inside of your body, how are we going to keep it protected? Let's look at some regulations. Everybody's favorite General Duty Clause 5.1a, each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. 1926-1153 Echo 2, respiratory protection. Where respirator use is required by this section, the employer shall institute a respiratory protection program in accordance with 29 CFR 1910-134. Yes, 1926 is telling you, look at 1910, right? Construction is telling you, look at general industry. 1926-1153 Foxtrot 1. The employer shall not allow dry sweeping or dry brushing where such activity can contribute to employee exposure to respirable crystalline silica unless wet sweeping, HEPA filter vacuuming, or other methods that minimize the likelihood of exposure are not feasible. 1926-1153 Foxtrot 2, the employer shall not allow compressed air to be used to clean clothing or surfaces where such activity could contribute to employee exposure to respirable crystalline silica unless, and then it gets into some conditions, compressed air is used in conjunction with the ventilation system or no alternative methods are feasible. 1926-1153 Gulf 4, the employer shall designate a competent person to make frequent and regular inspections of job sites, materials, and equipment to implement the written exposure control plan. These are the broad stroke regulations that could apply to your company regardless of what trade you're in. What all this is telling you is take care of your people. Don't let anything go in the air and then let them breathe it in. Now let's dig a little bit deeper. Now I'm not going to read every single bit of this, but I'm going to do a basic capturing. Feel free to come back and look at this later on or screen capture and read. 1926-1153 Gulf. Employers shall establish and implement a written exposure control plan that includes at least the following elements: a description of all the tasks that involve respirable crystalline silica, a description of all the control methods. How are you going to control it? A description of all the housekeeping methods. Whenever this stuff gets on the ground, how are you going to deal with it? As well as how do you empty the trash can? This is a place where I've seen literally people have been very, very safe and protected while they're actually drilling. And then they'll take that little reservoir and they'll go dump it directly into a trash can. And boom, now you have a cloud of dust kicking up in your face. This is a place where a lot of people that I've seen kick out crystalline silica dust. Description of procedures used to restrict access to work areas when necessary. Employers shall review and evaluate the effectiveness of this written exposure control plan at least annually and update it as necessary. Make the written exposure control plan readily available for examination and copying upon request. The employer shall designate a competent person to make frequent and regular inspections of job site materials and equipment to implement the written exposure control plan. And the employer shall make medical surveillance available at no cost to the employee and at reasonable time and place for each employee who required under this section to use a respirator for 30 or more days per year. So if you are requiring your employees to use a respirator for 30 or more days, you shall make medical surveillance available to them at no cost. And now we move into training, employee training, 1926-1153I. The employer shall ensure that each employee covered by this section can demonstrate knowledge and understanding of at least. Now we're going to pause real quick. Let me ask you a question. If you were going to go buy a new car and you wanted a demonstration of what that car could do, would you want that salesperson to just talk to you? Or are you going to want to put your hands on the car and actually see what the car can do? That is the difference between demonstration versus just signing off on some piece of paper. They need to be able to demonstrate that they know how to abate the hazards with silica and airborne particles. The health hazards associated with silica, specific tasks that could result in silica exposure, measures that have been implemented to protect employees from exposure. The contents of this section, the identity of the competent person designated by the employer, the purpose and a description of the medical surveillance program that's required that we already kind of talked about a little bit. And you've got to make this section readily available without cost to each employee covered by this section. Now we're going to swing over to 1910. Remember 1926 said look at 1910? So let's look at 1910. This is specifically covering respiratory protection program. First of all, the plan needs to be updated as soon as anything changes that could affect respirator use. The procedures for selecting respirators. Medical evaluations of employees required to use respirators. Yes, they have to have a medical evaluation. Fit testing procedures for tight-fitting respirators. Procedures for proper use of respirators in routine and reasonably foreseeable emergency situations. Procedures for cleaning, disinfecting, storing, inspecting, repairing, discarding, and otherwise maintaining respirators. Procedures for regulating the air quality and quantity. Training of employees in the respiratory hazards to which they are potentially exposed during routine and emergency situations. Training of employees in the proper use of the respirators, including putting them on and removing them. Any limitations on their use and their maintenance. And procedures for regularly evaluating the effectiveness of the program. Does this protect me? So I'm going to do a very quick walk you through how to figure out what you need to do to protect yourself. And this is just a general rule. If there are any questions with this, talk to the competent person for your company in regards to crystalline silica protection and or particle awareness. But as a general rule, 1926-1153 Charlie 1 has a chart that'll help point the direction for protecting yourself from crystalline silica. Now, first and foremost, we want to follow the hierarchy of controls and try to protect everybody, not just the person using the tool. On the controls, first we're going to look at removing the hazard. Do we even have to do this work specifically? If we do, okay, now can we look at replacing the hazard? If that's not going to work, now we look at engineering controls. And this is where attachments like this in this picture come into play. But this may not get us into that safe area for this employee specifically. If this is the case, now we look at administrative controls, changing the way people work, and then finally, personal protective equipment. Now we look at this chart right here. And let's say we're using a handheld power saw and we're definitely exposed to crystalline silica. When used indoors or in an enclosed area, we need PPE that is APF 10. Keep in mind there is an hours per shift allowance up here. Now, according to OSHA document 335202-2009, assigned protective factors for the revised respiratory protection standard. And if you need a copy of this, just go to your Google box and type in OSHA 335202-2009. And what we're using this document for is to figure out exactly what APF 10 looks like. This is APF 10. This is APF 10. This is APF 25, 25, 50, APF 1000, APF 1000, and APF 10,000. So why are we covering this? Because in a world filled with endless options for masks for protective equipment, personal protective equipment, how do we know that it's AP 10? And if you look at the Center for Disease Control, they will tell you that anything that's rated N95, R95, anything that has these kind of ratings are going to be AP 10 qualified. But you need to make absolute sure that if you're going for AP 10 qualifications, that when you look at the box or you look at the product, that you can clearly see that N95, R95, you can clearly see that marking. If not, it may be just a dust mask, a nuisance mask, and not APF 10 qualification. The backside of this is if you're doing normal work and you're handing out respirators, APF 10 respirators to your employees who are just trying to protect themselves from regular pollen or something like that, now the question comes up, have you had that employee medically evaluated prior to issuing them a respirator? Have they been fit tested prior to issuing the respirator? Have they had all this training prior to issuing the respirator? And this is where a lot of companies, you need to ask the question, do you want to give your people respirators or do you want to give them nuisance masks? There is a big difference. And if you're going to give them respirators, that is an APF 10 qualified respirator. Now, OSHA has made certain allowances for employees using their own respirators if they just want to. But again, there are rules that have to be played by if this is the case. So before you start letting employees bring their own respirators, understand there are rules to that as well. Now, I very briefly touched on 1926-103 turns around and tells you look at 1910-134. Now, let's take a look at a slide that I just barely touched, but we didn't actually dig into. We need to dig into this one. 1910-134A1. In the control of those occupational diseases caused by breathing air contaminated with harmful dusts, fogs, fumes, mists, gases, smoke, sprays, or vapors, the primary objective shall be to prevent atmospheric contamination. Did you hear me? Did you hear me? The primary objective shall be to prevent atmospheric contamination. So whether you're looking at the hierarchy of controls or you're looking at 1910-134 Alpha 1, stop just slapping respirators on your people and submitting the rest of the job site to the crap that you're kicking out. Atmospheric contamination is the primary objective. This shall be accomplished as far as feasible by accepted engineering control measures. For example, enclosure or confinement of operation, general and local ventilation, and substitution of less toxic materials. When effective engineering controls are not feasible or while they are being instituted, appropriate respirators shall be used pursuant to this section. We do not start with respirators. That is the last option. Last option. All right, so we're going to wrap this up. First, we look at the work that we're doing. Then we turn around, we take all the regulations, all the rules, all the company manuals, GC manuals, as well as direction of our competent person. We take all of that, we weigh that in, we look at the hierarchy of controls, and we try to reduce the hazard to where we don't even need personal protective equipment or special tool attachments. If we can't do that, then we start working our way down. We look at these tools, check the manufacturer's recommendations, and see what the compliance is, see what the AP rating is going to be on this tool attachment. We train our people on how to use the tools properly. If we have to step into the world of PPE, we check the PPE to make sure it's rated for what we're trying to use it for. And then, again, we train our people on how to use the PPE properly. We make sure that everybody has exactly what they need, and we implement this crystalline silica protection and airborne particle protection flawlessly, because we don't want this. I hope this video finds you well. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.